Okay, so again, we're basically here tonight because we want to go over some things with you. We've been doing work at the Navy Yard Mills, which I'm assuming you're all familiar with, which is why you're here. And what we're going to do is I'm going to give a brief presentation on some of the background of the site and what's gone on there. Then Gary is going to go through the ATSDR portion, which is a health assessment that was done on the site, and explain that to you and what those results were. And then after that, what I'd like to do is just be available for you to all come and ask us questions. Certainly if there are questions you want to ask the whole group, we can do that and do it in this forum, but we thought it would be good if anybody has one-on-one questions they want to talk to us about, well then we'll be here for you. We said we'd be here till at least 8 o'clock, longer if people want to talk. We do have a couple of representatives from the Pediatric Environmental Health Unit who are also on their way, so they'll be available to answer some additional questions. Okay, so the Navy Yard Mill site, Dracut, is what we're here to talk about. A little bit of site history. If you can't read it, I'll just breeze through it. The Navy Yard Mill operated from the 1700s until the 1960s. Currently, there are 13 interconnected buildings which were constructed between 1860 and 1952. A former printed circuit board manufacturer operated at the site from approximately 1980 to 2000, and is considered to be the source of the contamination of industrial solvents, which is two in particular that we've looked at attributed to the site. They're called TCE and PCE because their names are long and confusing, trichloroethylene and tetrachloroethylene. So, in 2008, in October, EPA initiated a site investigation to identify the sources of contamination. That just means that we went into the mill building and tried to find out. We knew there was a problem, we knew there was something there, so we went to try and find out what the source of that problem was and where exactly it came from. From 2008 to the present, we've been doing sampling at the site, which has included groundwater, soil, indoor air, and subslab vapor. So, if those terms aren't familiar, it basically just means that we analyzed the groundwater around the site, took some samples of the water, took some samples of the actual soil around the site, and then did subslab vapor testing, which looks into below the foundation of the building, because that's a difficult area to get to, so looking at the subslab in the foundation area. This is a basic site map. The way the buildings are labeled, they're basically use numbers, so the teams might refer to them by numbers, but if you're unfamiliar, you can take a look. A few of them are labeled, but it basically goes building 1, 4, 19, etc. You can see the streets here abutting School Street and Business Street and Pleasant Street. So indoor air samples were confirmed the presence of high levels of TCE and PCE within certain buildings. So you can see there's a lot of buildings there. It wasn't, not every building we found levels of contamination that were of concern. The EPA recommended remedial activities at the site in November 2011. We focused remedial activities on the contaminated soils in the basement of Building 1, which is used in the past to store drums of solvents for the location of the release in chemicals, likely in 1987. So there were some drums in the actual building which were holding solvents, whether or not there was solvents in all of them or they had remnants of it. And a flood in 1987 due to the adjacent Beaver Brook made that an issue, so we went in and addressed that. Yes?
Which building is Building 1?
So Building 1, I apologize. So Building 1 is right here, and a portion of that building is where the A-level self-storage is. But it's on the...
That's the self-storage.
Right, but this...
This one? Yeah. No, Building 1.
They are, and we'll go through a little bit of each building there, but that was back, again, like I said, in 1987, and it was in the basement. So it was flooding that, flooded the basement area from the brook, which is back there, as you can see.
Well, I remember being out there maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay, so again, we're referencing building numbers. I apologize for that, but concentrations of TCE and PCE in indoor air in buildings 1, 4, and 19, which is the self-storage Nextine, which is the business operations for a catering business, and the Future Stars building, which is building 19. Again, when we're referencing the buildings too, it's important to note that That doesn't mean that contamination was found throughout the entire building. That means that there could have been a specific area that was addressed in there. So we found levels that were above Mass DEP, which is the State Environmental Protection, or State Department of Environmental Protection, and EPA standards. So states have standards and federal agencies have standards, but in this case we were looking at breaches of both of those standards, meaning it was above levels of concern for the state as well as the federal. That prompted EPA to request a site health consultation from ATSDR, which is what Gary and Tara will talk about. EPA assessed the Building 4 area and focused on several vapor intrusion pathways, took immediate action to seal off significant vapor intrusion, which reduced those concentrations by about 50%. That means, like, if you look at a floor and you can see there's a crack in the floor, and we could sense from testing that vapors were coming through there, Kathy and her team went in and sealed that off to reduce the exposure rate and the vapors coming through the floors there. Due to the presence of this vapor intrusion pathways, EPA continued to collect indoor air samples through April 2012. So the results of the testing through April 2012 were what the health assessment was based on.
Excuse me.
Yes.
By how much did the levels exceed the base?
Do you know that fact?
Well, in the next time space in that area, excluding levels that were in the of 100 to 200, and that's what Gary's going to talk about. We compared that to the actual numbers of the Federal Public Health Department, compared that again. So it was significantly higher. And it's seasonal also, so it depends on what time of year it's tested.
So for those, if you want on cable, the question was what were the levels like and how much did they exceed? And they were in the 100 to 200 level range, which might not mean anything to you right now, but it was fairly high, and they'll go through that in the health assessment as well. And this just explains a little bit, which I've already talked about pretty much. But the basic idea is that we had samples collected through April 2012 that we looked at and found exceedances, and some of them were addressed immediately to reduce exposure, which is important to note too, because I don't want anybody to think that we wouldn't have, for instance, removed people from a building if there was an immediate threat, but it was something that we took care of what needed to be taken care of at the time, but wanted to address to make sure that all the issues in the long run were addressed as well. So ATSDR recommended that EPA take steps to then reduce the exposures further, which is why we're going to be going back in and doing some additional work on the building. Okay, current work activities. We are working with the Army Corps of Engineers, which is another federal agency, and they are helping us to relocate the Future Stars business. I want to note too that we've been working really closely with the owner and operator of Future Stars. He's been really great, and we never told him that he had to immediately leave, but he recognized that there could be an issue there and wanted to be proactive on moving to a new space, so we've helped him do that and working with the Army Corps. They haven't been in that building in the Navy Yard Mills in a while. He's been operating outside for most of the summer as well. We'll be temporarily relocating the Nextine business to another building that doesn't have any concern and doing work to reduce exposure in their building they're currently in, and we're anticipating to start that hopefully in the end of October. After all this work starts from now through beginning in October, it's likely to only take about 6 months or so, and then we'll be completed with everything on site. We'll continue to work with ATSDR, DEP, and the town as we have, just to make sure that everything's on par and there aren't any issues. Those are our contacts. I can certainly put that back up. I'm pretty sure we all have cards with us too, so if you guys don't want to write this down or just want information after, I'm happy to share that with you. Most of our contact information is on the fact sheets in the back as well. All right. So,
a question?
Sure.
You indicated that the levels were reduced by 50% when you first went in. Is that when you took out the soil and added additives to the property?
Okay. So the question was that on one of the slides it says that the contamination was reduced by about 50% after doing some post-sealing sampling. And Kathy, do you want to speak to that, or?
Yeah, can you go back to
The map? Yeah.
So in 1987, there was a flood of Beaverbrook, and the drums that were in there released, and the contents of the solvents were released to the soil. So there's two separate things that we did in this area. we went into the basement. We tried to. It's a very difficult area to access the soils. It was under an actual paved floor, so we had to take that floor up and apply chemical oxygen to try and mix it and reduce it. It wasn't really working because the concentrations were too high in the soil. And so we then removed the soils themselves. That's one thing that we did, in the hopes that it would have an impact on the air here. But in this, so here's the basement building one. It was in this basement. A-level self-storage, the concentrations in that space, and Gary will talk about that, were not, I think they weren't as significant as in next time. So I think this A-level self-storage, I don't think there's a concern to people entering that. When you get into this area here, this is right below the formal boiler area, and so there are vapors that are coming up into that space. So when we were taking the air samples and we determined that in the next dying space that it was significantly higher than we felt comfortable with, we went in and looked at the space to say, okay, is there anything obvious that we can do right now? And we found a little gap, which was allowing vapors to come in. So that's when we put the grout in, and that reduced from that space by approximately 50%, the concentrations of vapor coming up. So that's what I mean by reducing it by 50%.
Okay, but this problem has been ongoing since 2006. Are there readings from 2006 taken on a regular basis for those areas? Because there was an order of remediation, from what I can see, from DEP that they have air purifiers on the property. When you went in, there was a notation in the report that indicated that you tested without them because there was an indication that they weren't always operational. So if your testing in 2011 indicated the high levels that you were not comfortable with, what were the levels from 2006 to the time of the testing? And when do we get some information as to that? Because that's a concern. I think a lot of us here are concerned about Building 19, which is the Future Starts, and in particular, that section where the children exercise, because that's where they work 95 to 100% of the time.
Yeah, well, so Gary's going to go over the specific room he can go by building and go over that with you and talk about the details. What I will say is that the thing about vapor intrusion, one building can differ from the next. And with Nextdyne, there was definitely this gap that was allowing a lot of vapors to come up. And we did test turning the APU units, the air purifying units, off and then with them on, because we wanted to test to say, okay, how effective are the units? And they were fairly effective with them being on. But then you look at sometimes people who were there would turn them off. So we talked to the owner, and he did tell them you must keep these units on. And so we did address that.
So who was buying the store from 2006 to 2011?
For the indoor air, the owner was working under a state order, so there was some sampling going on.
How frequent was the
We have plenty of time, and I really want to hear the questions, but I think it's important that we let Gary talk about the health assessment, because that's probably why you're here. And he might be able to answer a few of your questions, and then we'll have plenty of time for more Q&A. Does that sound okay with everybody?
Can I just ask a question?
Sure.
Is this document been made public?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
If I read this and I had a kid there, I would be furious.
I want to make one note too. That was a good question, whether or not the document's public. It is on our website. We do have copies here. But also, just to note, we got ATSDR handed over the document to EPA, I believe the last week in July. We met with the town on August 2nd. So from the time we got the document to when we shared the information with the town, it was, if a week, it was at most a week or 10 days, I think. So we set up a meeting with town. We came in, presented it. And from there, we've moved forward. We presented it at the select board meeting on September 11th. And we wanted to have a meeting with you all and inform you to the best extent possible. And that's why we're here tonight. And certainly, this won't be the end of our involvement. Like I said in the last slide there, we'll be around. We want to answer all your questions. We want you to feel comfortable with the situation. But just so you know the timeline of everything, we didn't have this information until the end of July and shared it immediately with the town and have moved forward from then. So I'll turn it over to Gary.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much.
Let me get into this. Okay.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And my name is Gary Perlman with the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. We're a federal public health agency. We're located in Atlanta, Georgia, and we have 10 regional offices. We co-locate with EPA, so we're in the EPA Region 1 office that serves all of New England. Again, so the agency is based in Atlanta, Georgia. It's a federal public health agency. Serves the public by using scientific techniques to protect public health, looking at trusted information for exposures and disease related to toxic substances. Particularly, we look at industrial solvents, industrial chemicals. So the background, ATSDR was asked by EPA to assess the indoor air data from 3 main buildings. Those buildings, as indicated, Building 1, 4, and 19. So Building 1 was the A-level storage, Building 4 was the next dine, and Building 19 was the batting practice, future All-Stars. So their question was to look at the indoor air levels of trichloroethylene, or TCE, and tetrachloroethylene, or PCE. And the data was collected and provided to us from January to April of 2012. We wrote a health consultation reviewing the indoor air data, which we have here. We have a copy of this available. We have some in the back room, and it will be it's on the website. So this health consultation reviewed those data, and we're going to be discussing the findings tonight.
Excuse me, could I just ask you a
Yes.
question? Wasn't the data collected from January of 2011 until April of 2012? That's the information I have in a document.
Yeah, the 2011 data was collected from the subslab ventilation system.
Okay.
It was not used to interpret the health implications, just to see that there is levels that could enter the building.
Thank you.
And so that was the impetus for us to further
Thank
look
you.
at this. Okay. The map of the site. Okay. Did you need a map of that site? I'm not sure why they didn't display. Want me to try to get that again? Just one quick question. Yeah. All right. Let me just see here. Okay. Again, so this is the map of the site. So we have here is Building 19, this is Building 1, and this is Building 4. It's kind of a small map, I apologize, but we can refer to this as often as needed. So a brief sort of question and answer here about what TC and PC are. They're both man-made chemicals. They're both non-flammable, colorless solvents. They're found often in adhesives, paint removers, and spot removers. TCE, or trichloroethylene, was used in dry cleaning, but no more. And tetrachloroethylene, or PC, is used in dry cleaning now. Some of the scientific studies that looked at the effects of TC and PC exposure in the air, review some of those now. In animal studies, exposure to low levels of TC, or again, trichloroethylene, may cause heart-related health effects among unborn babies. So it can cause cardiac defects in the animal studies that were looked at in developing fetus. TCE, again, can also affect the immune system in such ways as decreasing the thymus gland weight. For occupational studies, which is where we look at what workers who work with this compound, what some of the health effects may have been seen, for tetrachloroethylene, exposure to that may cause harmful effects on the visual system, perhaps resulting in inability to distinguish between the colors blue and yellow. And some government agencies have considered that trichloroethylene and tetrachloroethylene to be carcinogens. So the exposure, so trichloroethylene and tetrachloroethylene in the soil and groundwater can evaporate and enter into the indoor air of some of the buildings in the Navy Yard Mill site, which has happened. People who occupy or visit these buildings may then be exposed to these compounds in the air they breathe. So in this document, we have a series of conclusions. I'm going to go through those next. They're quite specific to buildings and amount of time spent in each building and chemical related. So I'm going to go over it slowly. Ask any questions you have at any time. The first, we're looking at the exposures to tetrachloroethylene, or PCE, in buildings 1 and 4. There's no current risk to anyone in those buildings from that contaminant. In building 19, in the baseball practice area, the baseball practice area had 2 main rooms. There's a big room where they practice batting and kitchen and throwing the ball, and then the second room where there was weightlifting and bikes, and there's a secondary room. This is related to the secondary room. People who were in the secondary room, children, adolescents, and adults, who exercise for more than 8 hours a week for many months in that room, may have had an increased risk of health effects associated with exposure to tetrachloroethylene, perhaps such as altered color vision. For trichloroethylene, we're looking at buildings 1 and 4. The concern with that is female workers who are pregnant and spent time in buildings 1 and 4, perhaps 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, for several weeks to several months, may be at risk for developing health effects associated with TC exposure, and these may include reduced thymus gland weight and increased risk of autoimmune disease, and also perhaps having a child with heart problems, heart defect. In buildings 1 and 4, for adult males and non-pregnant female workers who spend time in these buildings 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, several weeks to several months, they may have health effects related to exposure to TC that include reduced thymus gland weight that may increase the risk of an autoimmune disease. Looking at building 19 in the main batting area, for trichloroethylene, children and adolescents who play or practice baseball in the main room for 8 or more hours a week. So that may be 2 hours a day for 4 days a week, but an extended period of time, 8 or more hours per week, for several weeks to several months. That's a long duration. May be at risk for damage to the immune system, such as reduced thymus gland weight and possibly developing autoimmune disease. For pregnant women who are in the main exercise room, the big room with the batting cage, and they exercise for more than 8 hours a week, there is a concern that that exposure may also result in children with heart problems. And pregnant women who visit the main room to watch a family member practice are not at risk. We looked at exercising and its effect on increased breathing rates. That's the difference between just watching versus exercising. Now looking at the second room, this is the room that has weightlifting equipment and exercise bikes of building 19 with the future All-Stars. Children and adolescents who play or practice in the smaller room for 6 or more hours a week, for several weeks to several months, may be at risk for damage to the autoimmune system, again reduced thymus gland weight, and also other autoimmune diseases. In the second room, pregnant women who exercise in the smaller room for 4 hours a week for several weeks to several months may be at risk for having a child with health problems in their heart. And pregnant women who visit the smaller room for more than 10 hours a week, non-exercising, may also be at similar risk. The recommendations that we had based on these conclusions were given to EPA, and they included to take immediate steps to stop or reduce exposures to trichloroethylene and tetrachloroethylene in the indoor air buildings 1, 4, and 19. In 19, particularly the baseball practice area.
When was that recommendation?
That was given in this document, which was finalized on July 26th, and we gave it to them that day. And the meeting with the town was on August 2nd. So as soon as we had the information, we told them right away, and the town was notified very quickly shortly thereafter.
And why weren't the parents notified? I mean, I wasn't.
Right, isn't
I
there
just
some
thought
kind of
everyone did.
regulation or something of notification when certain chemicals go above certain levels? Because I've heard nothing about this. There was a newspaper article saying that there were postings in buildings.
I
Saw
saw
nothing
nothing.
like that. And, you know, if we knew prior, from like 2006 when DEP was involved, that there might have even been any question of this, things might have been different, you know, not exposing our children to these chemicals. So is there any kind of regulation or anything like that?
Our agency is advisory. We're not a regulatory agency, but
Well, DEP and EPA are. So do they have any
just a
regulations
moment,
concerning notification? Because they are regulatory agencies.
Yeah, no, I completely understand, and what we've done is, unfortunately, not unfortunately, but we have a process that we've gone through, and we did talk with, it's a right to know for you guys, and that's why you're here, and I appreciate you being here. And what we did was we went right to the town, which is what we always do, and you know, we're the federal government, we work with the state, and we work with municipalities, so we did meet with the town, and one part of what we took into consideration also was that we knew that the Future Stars was not operating inside the building at the time, and that they were operating outside for the summer. I did share our fact sheets with them. They had the owners of the...
That's not entirely true.
I was in that building.
They've been getting lessons and stuff.
Yes, I told them we're in that.
Okay. Well, so the impression that we were under is that we did communicate. We've been in constant communication with the owners of the building. We did give fact sheets to them. They said that there were some signs up and that there were air purifying units in the buildings at the times that the people in the building likely saw or were aware of to a degree. And I understand you're a parent, and I completely understand your concern, and we're happy to answer any specific questions you have. But this did move fairly quickly, and we were trying to get the information to you as best as possible. It has been up on our website, and I think there was some information up on the town website as well. But
Nobody knew. Actually, I have to be honest with you. I got this last week in an email from a bunch of parents circulating this. I read it 4 times.
is that the ATSDR document, or is that?
The House report
Okay.
that they
Okay.
did on this. And I'm like, what is this? Monday I go on the website, the town website, for something other than seeing a public notice. Knew nothing. Knew absolutely nothing.
Right.
You know, I think one thing needs to be clarified here, okay? This is because the EPA has changed the rules,
That was going to be my next question.
okay?
Joe, I'm happy to go through that too if you want right now, really quickly. Not quickly. We can spend. They don't understand. No, that's a fair point. So what Joe's mentioning is an important point. Is that we have the way EPA operates and the numbers that we've referenced here. There are national numbers that we use under what's called a national contingency plan. And when we see levels that are of concern, we base them on that number. So, for instance, as I mentioned earlier, the state might have a different number because the state they operate under different numbers than we do often. Not all the time. Sometimes they're the same. But when EPA comes in as the federal agency, we operate using our numbers. So we have what is called a reference concentration, which is the number we look at for TCE and PCE. A new study, one new study. Last year in 2011, in September of 2011, there was a new number for TCE, which was significantly lower. It went from 20 to 1? I'm sorry, it went from 20 micrograms per cubic meter to 2 micrograms per cubic meter. So the health assessment was done based on this number of 2. DEP doesn't operate on that number, had not been operating on that number. But the assessments that were done, this is based on 10 years of scientific studies. So with everything that EPA does as an agency, if you can understand, EPA has only existed since 1970, so it's fairly new, and we're constantly getting new science and new data that's showing different things about different chemicals and different things to be conscious of. I just want to finish really quick. I'll ask your question. So what happened was we have a new number, and based on our national contingency plan, we operate under this number, and that's what the health assessment is based on. So that's what we're focused on here. And I'm sure Gary and Tara can go through if you have specific concerns too. I mean, it's something that our numbers are very, very conservative. Very conservative. It's not as if we're saying that we're going to look at something and a number is possibly going to have a harmful health effect. But EPA's mission is to protect human health and the environment. So you can imagine that our numbers are fairly low and they're getting lower. And this is something that we're going to have to deal with sites across the country. This happens to be the first site that we've had to work with this number on. This is going to go on all over the country. Yeah?
So it's based on like 10 years of
Yeah, this is 10 years of scientific studies.
published finalized last September. And so we did the when I brought ATSDR into the health consultation, that's what changed, because now you have this new number, which is much lower. So in the past, where we thought that was protective, now this new data is showing that it is.
Okay.
What I'm curious about, okay, most of us sitting here, we just read this tonight.
Yep.
Okay, I've been a Dracut resident for 45 years. And what I don't understand is what made you people aware in 2011, what blew the whistle on that, what got you people involved here, which is a good thing that we have this, trying this out.
So,
and was it prior to 2011 that this stuff was leaking out from those buildings?
so as we mentioned earlier, DEP, the state agency, has been in the site since 2004? 2007, I'm sorry, 2007. And
Right.
so, right, so as I mentioned also, DEP has different numbers than we operate under. So they were working with the owners and they did institute different controls.
No, I'm talking about you people.
I understand. So
I'm talking
when
about-
DEP got to a point, what happens often when EPA gets involved in a site like this is that DEP requests our assistance. Either DEP will request that EPA become involved. It can be for
Why-
various
why-
regions. Because we typically have more resources than they do. And in this, do either of you want to talk about this? Or?
They have more money.
Do it.
EPA has more money.
Well,
You're
I
welcome.
think the thing was that, I think
So in other words, they weren't involved before.
the reason why DEP asked us to get involved, because they wanted to start looking at the source of the contamination. And like Kelsey said, we have more resources to do that. So when we went in 2000, we started sampling in 2008, 2009.
Yeah, but what made you go to this site? It could have been anywhere. What?
Because DEP has been working there, and they asked us to go in and look at the source contamination, because you can't control the vapor intrusion until you can remove that soil. So if you have contaminated soil,
So in
you always
other
want to
words,
remove
this
that
has been
soil.
going on way before you people got involved, that you didn't even know about, and we didn't know about. That's all.
And I would just note too that this is an old mill building. There are old mill buildings all over New England. We work on a large number of old mill buildings in New England that have issues such as this because of their operations back in as far back as the 1800s.
Right, but also you're saying that one of the main reasons was because of the soldering company that was in there, and that was not as late as being the old building, which is actually causing the problem. So I understand what you're saying, that it's an old building, but it was roughly in the 80s with this company that,
Right.
was using these chemicals, which is causing the problems.
Yep.
But it still goes back to regulatory sites, DEP and EPA were involved. And if things were above levels, what are the regulations concerning notification of people that were using the building? Because I still don't understand that, because I applaud you for getting involved now, and I'm really glad that you're getting involved, but again, if we knew about this when it was happening in the beginning, we probably wouldn't be talking here right now, because the kids would have gone somewhere else.
Yeah.
So, where was the process of notification involved when discovery happened?
Can anybody speak to that? I can't. I haven't been involved on the site for more than the past several months, because when we did this health study, I became involved. You guys want to speak? Okay. I'm sorry if I didn't introduce.
It wasn't an issue
Can I?
until the levels were changed.
I understand, but they
Well,
did
that's-
put up-
I-
they
let me
did
just
put up a
clarify.
thing saying that if
Yeah.
my child spent 8 months in there out of the year, they could be elevated.
So I just
My
want to clarify
child's been
too.
going there for like
So-
3 years.
Yeah, but that's because of this new study. Prior to then, the rules were different.
Well, but anybody.
It was okay for people.
Okay, can we, sorry, can I just clarify for 1 second? I just want to clarify the question. The question, if I'm hearing you correctly, is why didn't you know at all, regardless of whether or not the levels were of concern, why didn't you know that there was something taking place in the building? And that's a fair question.
Right, because
So,
regulatory commission.
understand. So I apologize. I should introduce, we have Iris Davis and Kyle McAfee here from the DEP, and one of them maybe will speak to that a little bit more too.
Originally, when we were notified in 2007, we were working with the owners to get the building assessed, all the buildings where people were working and visiting, and the air testing that was done required posting when certain levels were reached, when certain plateaus were reached. When there was a level of serious concern, there was a brief time. I think we had 1 round, maybe 2 rounds of samples in Building 19 that were originally elevated. There was a posting at the front door at that time. It was on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that was posted by the front door during that time, and that's when the air purifying units were put in. Since, I'm going to say roughly 2008, we haven't had any recurrences under the old standard that were elevated enough to require the posting. That has stayed in buildings 1 and 4. Those still have the postings in there because the levels are on occasion up above these levels of increased concern. So if you didn't see the posting when it was originally put up, it was taken down after that point.
What door? The door that's
The
like
front door,
can't see 'cause it's behind it?
when you open the front door to
Yeah.
walk in to Future Stars, it was posted right there.
No one here ever saw it. There's no way our kids would ever have walked in that building
We
if
did
saw that.
verify, at the time, the engineer that was assigned to the site did verify that the sign had
So
been
is
posted.
that why the people would have
Posted
for how long?
Is
that
that
why
why
that
they
building's
then
empty?
take down?
It was up for several months, but I don't know, I can't, as I was not the engineer in charge at that time, I can't tell you exactly when it was up, how many times that was verified, but I can tell you that the state was out there to verify that the sign was put up.
What year was that?
That was probably 2007 and 2008.
We're talking 4 or 5 years ago, so just keep in mind whether or not you were there at that time. I'm sure you probably all applied. Okay, so Gary's got a couple more slides I just want to get through really quickly, and then we'll do a few more questions, or plenty more questions.
Yeah, no, I appreciate this is a very sensitive issue, and be glad to answer any questions now or later after this presentation. So I just want to briefly indicate what our agency is doing now. We're working with EPA to decide appropriate actions to reduce exposure in all the buildings. We're also going to review additional indoor air data collected from 2007 to the present to see what those levels were like, and compile a similar document, a health consultation. And regional staff, Tara and myself, will be available to talk to the community at any time about anything related to this site or any health concerns you may have. We have our contact information here. I know it's small, and I apologize. We have business cards. We'd be glad to meet. The fact sheet has our contact information. You can call us anytime you wish, email us. I understand this is a difficult issue. We're glad to answer any questions. So
I have a question.
Summarizes.
Do you have any kind of record saying how many people that were exposed to, say, TCE that have come down with Parkinson's or liver cancer, kidney cancer?
I'm not aware of any
That's
studies.
what I heard. That's what it causes.
Yeah.
Parkinson's,
I'm not aware of that.
liver and kidney cancer.
We can look into that and get back to you. I don't have the information up.
Well, that's why I'm here. I'm worried about my son's health.
Yeah, I understand. We have, or soon will have, members of the Pediatric Environmental Health Specialty Unit, which are physicians that can answer questions about medical issues.
Yeah.
They'd be glad to help you with any questions
That's
you may
what we're all
have.
worried about, medical issues.
I mean, you should know.
Was that related to the health study? Well,
Are you asking about, has there been like a health study
Yeah.
done on the residents of?
You know, like Michael
of
J.
Dracut?
Fox, he got Parkinson's disease from being exposed to chemicals, okay, along with 4 other people on the movie set, okay? So I, of course, went online when I read the newspaper today and read about the TCE and the PCE. And they say, especially the TCE, it's been known to cause Parkinson's disease, okay? It's one of the, and then liver and kidney cancer.
Exactly.
All our kids have been there for years playing in there. That's why we're pretty upset. And if you guys knew about it in '06,
Yeah.
there should have been more than a posting.
Well, we-
You know, us parents should have got a notification. I never would have let my son walk back in there.
And when it comes to your child's individual health, just to speak on that, when we look at data for a health consultation, like the one that you now have, we are looking at the risk to like a population of people that may be exposed to that contaminant. So we can't say specifically, you know, which person was exposed to exactly which amount and which person may or may not get sick from that exposure. Unfortunately, you know, there's no way for us to get down to that sort of individual health concern level. So we have to do like a population approach. And based on, you know, the assessment that was done, if you're looking at a population of people, that's what we're talking about. So I don't want you to walk away feeling like, you know, there's a certainty that your child will or would not be sick based on the health consultations that we do. You know, we have to look at like the population of people. And that's where it is very concerning as a parent to hear this information and think, oh my gosh, well, how much was my child exposed to and what are going to be the health effects to my child? I mean, that's what or myself or, you know, my family. And again, that's really, really hard for us. We can't say specifically who in the population may or may not get sick. We just have to say there is this additional risk to the population in general. Does that sort of start to...
You're like going around in a circle to us right now, and I don't need to be pacified. Of course, I know medical, all right? I'm not stupid in that. And if there is a risk, we don't go by population, we go by individuals, okay? And yes, there is a big risk. She's right, and so am I. And you're talking in circles to us about population. We don't care about population risk. We're caring about CF, and that you can get cancer, and that you can get Parkinson's, and that none of us were aware of this.
And it can take years.
It doesn't matter whether it was her son or my mother or my brother.
Right, I wasn't trying to give...
Never mind the population in a circle. I don't want to be pacified on that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I
We
wasn't...
should have been aware of it.
That's why we're all upset, because
The
we weren't
awareness.
told, and somebody knew in '06, somebody knew. And
Somebody
they still
knew.
opened the doors, and that sign was not on that door where we could see it. They hid it, they opened the door and held it open with a stopper, so you're just running in and out of there, and nobody saw that sign. None of us would be sitting here,
Right.
you know, so.
I'm sorry I can't address
Yeah,
that
so we
part
all
of
have to
it.
sit here and hope for the next 20 years our kids don't get sick.
Well, I would definitely encourage you to talk to your children's pediatricians, to your own
Yeah, of course I'm
doctors.
gonna take my son to the doctor and
But
have
that's
him.
what happened.
But like I said, Michael J. Fox, it came out like 12 years after he was exposed. He was 30 years old when he was diagnosed. And he was exposed at like 18, you know, along with the other 4 people on the movie set. It's just that if you guys knew about it, you should have, the day you knew about it, we should have been told. Every parent that had their kid going in there should have been handing a flyer when you walk in the door. You should have told the owner of Future Stars. You can't let kids come in here without these parents knowing about it.
Well, there's a question for you. Did the owner of Future Stars know what was going on when he started in the facility?
I can't speak for the owner of
But
Future Stars.
somebody can. Who can speak on that?
So,
Well, the owners know because they knew that somebody was there.
Yeah, they had to put the sign on the door, right? Right? And they made sure we didn't see it.
Future Stars.
Exactly.
I guess the question that you're asking is, what did the owner of the Future Stars know when? Is sort
Right,
of
when
the-
did he know that
the
there was
question.
06.
definitely an issue?
06.
Well, we don't know that. When did he
Yeah,
know?
that's when he got in order to put the sign on the door, right?
I don't know if the owner of Future Stars put the sign on the door, or if the owner of, I don't know which owner we're referring to when we say that an owner put it may have been